Hi, everyone. Rebecca and Emily here. Welcome to Step 5. So today we're going to be talking to you about social justice education. In research or literature, you may see social justice education and also social justice pedagogy. For our purposes today, we'll be using social justice education. They mean the same thing there. So we're going to start with this quote today by Nelson Mandela. And this quote is, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." So we're going to try to figure that out today and see how we can take actions ourselves and then teach our students to take action. So first, we want you to think about this question. What does social justice education look like to you? You can write this down on a piece of paper. You can draw symbols. Maybe some movement comes to mind, just whatever your thoughts are. If you want to take a moment to pause this video, do that really quick and then come back, you can do that. We will revisit that later. So first, defining social justice education. So educators and authors Lenore Riley Carlisle, Bailey Jackson, and Allison George, they reference the work of scholars in this field like Bell, Cochrane Smith, Frere, and Weisglass in order to define social justice education. You will learn more about some of those people later, but for now we're just going to look at the definition. So for our purposes, we're defining social justice education as the conscious and reflexive blend of content and process intended to enhance equity across multiple social identity groups, foster critical perspectives, and promote social action. And we're really going to be honing on that last word, action, today. So social justice education also seeks to provide equitable, safe, and inclusive educational experiences, while at the same time helping students develop these values that lead them to question, to investigate, and to take action from the classroom and into the world that they're living in. So with this, we can see that social justice education is a call and a commitment to action. So while recognizing and acknowledging injustice is vital and a great step, we also want to move even further in order to tangibly challenge and change what we're living in.
Thank you, Emily. So to better understand, here are some descriptions of social justice education from leaders in the field. Leanne Bell identifies it as both a process and a goal, with the ultimate aim being full and equal participation of all groups in a society that is mutually shaped to meet their needs. Social justice education is concerned with achieving equitable and quality education for all students. Hackman writes that social justice education encourages students to take an active role in their own education and supports teachers in creating empowering, democratic, and critical educational environments. Westheimer and Kane call for schools to develop justice-oriented citizens who look at social, political, and economic problems systematically and encourage in collective strategies for change. So as you can tell from these descriptions, social justice education is all-encompassing, meaning this type of education can create quality and equitable education for all students through the schools and teachers. It can be a way to educate students on injustices and inequalities in the world, encourage students' involvement in developing and critically thinking about these ideas. It can incorporate students' identities and backgrounds so all in the class can learn from each other. And it can encourage students to become agents of social justice in their communities, meaning they will take this further into action. So now let's take a look at movements that came before and played a part in influencing social justice education. Starting in the 1880s and 90s, the progressive education movement believed that education should focus on the whole child rather than on the content or teacher. Students learn best through active experimentation and experiencing the world. This can be traced back to the works of John Locke. John Dewey is a principal figure in this movement through school reform and publications. In the 1940s came social reconstructionism in education as a reaction to World War II. Reconstructionism believes that schools should be agents of social change. George Counts was a leader in this movement who was outraged by the inequality in education between rich and poor. He wanted teachers to educate students for social change in ways of building a new social order. We move on to multicultural education, which incorporates the histories, texts, values, beliefs, and perspectives of people from different cultural backgrounds. This movement can be traced as far back as 1896. However, during the 1980s is when educators developed a new approach examining schools as social systems and promoting the idea of educational equality. The emphasis is on creating a shared community that maintains the integrity of various groups and involves general education and experience for all students. Founded by Paulo Freire, critical pedagogy's goal is to emancipate the oppressed through critical consciousness. It developed means of using teaching to combat racism, sexism, and oppression. This leads us to social justice education. This movement came to the forefront in the mid-1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. It's based on the writings of Fanon, Freire, and Young, among others. It arose from the Black Power, New Left, and women's liberation movements of the late 1960s, early 1970s. So multicultural education asks students to critically examine social practices, reflect on what they learn, and put that learning into action is the key word. Therefore, it is believed that this type of critical multicultural education is social justice education. So now we're going to take a look at this timeline of influential figures. And we start with John Locke, who is the father of liberalism and also the creator of theory of mind. So although not included in this timeline, Karl Marx and Marxism also heavily influenced social change and social justice education in the mid-1850s. John Dewey had ideas of democracy and social reform in education. He is part of the progressive education movement. George Counts also was a part of the progressive education movement, but is mostly associated with social reconstructionism in education and influenced critical pedagogy. Frantz Fanon was a political philosopher, post-colonial studies, and critical theorist. Paulo Freire is the father of critical pedagogy and the writer of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And Leanne Bell is a social justice educator and the writer of Theoretical Foundations for Social Justice Education. Leanne Bell is one of many in the field today, but we wanted to highlight her since we're using her social justice definition and using her theories throughout this presentation. So now we move on to researchers, scholars, and educators in the field. This is a short list. There are many, many out there, and you can quickly go into a rabbit hole investigating them all. But if you're interested in further research in the subject matter, I highly encourage you to look up these people that are at the forefront of social justice education.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so we are now going to take a look at the United States education system specifically. So first, to kind of start off with, there's someone named Zachary Wright. Zachary Wright is an educator and national finalist for the Department of Education's School Ambassador Fellowship. Wright suggests that while many believe schools should assume a more passive stance when it comes to social and political issues, he suggests that the education system is actually inherently political. He says it's impossible for education to be a neutral environment when there are choices surrounding curriculum, school fees, funding, testing, all things that are social and political choices. And we have a visual for you here. You can see there's a man and there's animals and there's a tree. And he says, for a fair selection for everybody, everyone has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. So Something that may, taking a look at this, something that may look fair on the surface, such as everyone getting the same exam, can actually be really flawed and unjust underneath. So even though we see everyone's taking the same exam, not everyone is properly equipped to take this exam and succeed in doing so. So these injustices that we're talking about within the United States education system, this may surround race, gender, gender identity, class, ability, sexual orientation, immigration status, religious and spiritual practices, nationality, and so much more than we could possibly list for you here on one slide. And within these, we can see a disparity between student privilege. So those not privileged enough to receive an education equal to their more privileged peers receive a poor foundation. So not only are they not receiving an equitable education, but moving forward in their life, this can affect their ability to earn a certain income, access to healthcare, housing, safety. So it's really impacting more than just who they are as students. So it can, and that in turn impacts our society as a whole, both culturally and economically. So the question is, talking about the larger education system, what areas can we transform and shift to in order to rethink our actions here? So we have a few areas to consider, and this is provided by Mills College. These are some ways we're thinking about adapting programmatic leadership. This is speaking to the kind of chain of leadership that's in the education system. So let's take administrators. We're looking for administrators to take a human interest in their teachers, and then in turn, teachers taking a human interest in their students. So this meaning learning who their students are as people and not just objects of learning to regurgitate information. And then same thing for teachers. They're not just objects to teach these down here. They're also real people with lived experiences and backgrounds. So going through this chain of leadership, and hopefully this leads to a curriculum that embraces students, their backgrounds and their experiences. And again, educators in these positions of power use that leadership to drive change. So moving on to planning and assessment, this is a little self-explanatory, but this is, when we're planning and assessing, we're trying to seek insight from that curriculum we just talked about. So identifying potential inequities that could arise and evaluating how we're going to proceed from that. So again, looking back to that visual, is this really serving all of my students, or are there some things that maybe some people aren't equipped and they aren't, on, in this same playing field? And by turn, educators can also examine the effectiveness of their learning environment and what they're creating. We have management and supervision. So this is speaking to educational leaders, ensuring that whatever they're managing and supervising, so let's say this could mean school boards, this could mean like school districts, but whatever they're over, their institution, their program, their faculty and staff, really making it a purpose to push to make changes. So rather than a box to check or a line that they make sure is in their contracts and their bylaws, while these things are great steps, again, we're trying to move past into action. And then lastly, we have socio-political relations. So we as educators work with large and diverse groups. And because of that, we really want to have empathy for these multiple groups and multiple perspectives. In these contexts, there may be competing interests to navigate. So we as educators have to be aware of that and take out any potential biases we have, and we're going to talk about that later, and navigate these relations accordingly. So here we're going to show you a visual in just a second, but social justice education is culturally responsive, inclusive, and equitable cultural, pedagogical, and curricular practices. I know that's a lot of words. So we're going to show you a visual, and you are welcome to pause and read this for yourself and come back and reference it. But we just wanted to show this to you. It provides really helpful language to further clarify what each of these words mean. But we can see that at the center is socially and racially just justice education. And then on the outside, we have all of these things that create that. So again, you can come and look back at this if you like. Take it away, Rebecca.
Thank you, Emily. So Emily kind of already got into this, but we want to see social justice education as being this umbrella, and under the umbrella are many education theories that can be implemented within the classroom to reinforce social justice. And as you can see on the right-hand side, here are a couple of examples: anti-oppressive education, cultural studies, democratic education, critical pedagogy, multiculturalism, post-structuralism, feminism, queer theory, post-colonialism, globalization, critical race theory, to name a few. So now we're going to move on to the critiques in social justice education. Some of them are: the term social justice can be loosely defined within the educational system, therefore losing its meaning. And it's too often used without meaning. So a lot of the times you'll see social justice as a mission statement within a school, yet the school isn't really implementing that in their curriculum and what they're teaching. The term can also be controversial, ambiguous, and ideologically weighted. It is increasingly seen as superfluous, complicated, and even threatening by some policymakers and pressure groups, who increasingly see curriculum not tied to basic literacy or numeracy as disposable and inappropriate. So if it doesn't have to do with learning how to write, read, and do mathematics, they feel like it's not necessary and inappropriate in the school system. Despite these critiques, social justice education is challenging problematic growth of conservative, neoliberal, capitalism, and overproductivity and unjust movements in the education system. There are, however, challenges within social justice education itself. There is a range of priorities and visions within social justice education. Challenges arise when arguing and coming up with the definition of social justice and how to go about implementing it in the educational system. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some strands of social justice education according to Kathy Heighton and Sylvia C. Bettis. So these are just examples of how it can be divided and organized into different focuses. So the first one we have is philosophical and conceptual. This includes defining terms, making distinctions, offering categories, grounding claims, and tracing their implication. This strand helps us get greater clarity about our assumptions, terms, and visions. So in the classroom, this can be seen as reading through actual concepts and theories. It's obviously more ideologically weighted. And for these reasons, some of the critiques of this strand is that it can have abstract language of philosophy and is often alienating and seemingly of little relevance to everyday concerns of most educational practitioners. And typically when we teach this type of social justice to our students, it's the kind that they're least drawn to. So next we move on to practical. This would be what social justice practice in education would look like. It provides specific examples of what works in challenging inequities and creating more genuine equality of opportunity. So according to Bettis in her discussion of university teaching out she outlines 7 skills, practices, and dispositions of activist social justice education. These include 1, promoting a mind-body connection, 2, connecting artful facilitation that promotes critical thinking, 3, engaging in explicit discussions of power, privilege, and oppression, 4, maintaining compassion for students, 5, believing that change towards social justice is possible, and 6, exercising self-care, 7, building critical communities. So within those 7 practices is what you might incorporate in your classes to promote social justice education, which then can promote social justice action. Next, we move on to ethnographic or narrative. This offers portraits of injustice related to schools and education, reflections by educators committed to social justice work, and narratives about personal experiences of lived injustice. This can move readers and calls for connections on a deeper level and self-reflection. Although one of the criticisms is that oftentimes it can be difficult to hear. This can be important though, because it puts a human face on the issue. So how you might see this in a classroom is you might bring in a guest speaker to talk about their lived injustice, or you might have a documentary on people that have lived injustices, or you yourself as an educator can share your stories if that's something you're comfortable and it's appropriate in your setting. The next one is theoretically specific. This arose out of the leftist and or radical movements within academia. These are specializations, and it started with intercultural movement in the 1920s and 30s. So this strand might include theories such as multiculturalism, critical pedagogy, and cultural studies. So in this strand, it just takes a deeper focus into one lens, kind of like what we were talking before, specific theories on how you might bring about injustices. So specifically like queer theory or feminism or multiculturalism, right? So it's just taking that one strand and focusing on it. The problem with this one though, is that you're just focusing on one thing. So if you are going to implement this, you should do a variety of them. That way you can see the intersectionality of them and how they overlap and relate to each other. Another criticism can be that it's too theoretically dense, like the first one, and abstract, which might alienate the very people it's trying to help empower. And our last one is democratically grounded. The biggest strength of this one is that it's a holistic vision of justice as a fundamental component of democratic citizenship. So this means that educators coming to social justice from this perspective situate their thinking about justice in connection to considering the fundamental purposes of education in a democratic society. They claim that among its primary purposes, education should help promote the knowledge and skills needed for thoughtful citizenship. So this one really heightens the connection between being a social justice agent and a participant in our democratic society. So if we're living in a democratic society, we should be concerned over social justice issues, is the main idea. A critique, though, is that it can be too idealistic and does not reflect our democracy as it is today. It can be exclusionary concepts. Actions taken in the name of democracy can be imperialistic, colonizing, self-righteous, and arrogant. So this is just a way to organize the many different ways of going about social justice education. Okay, so now we get to creating classrooms for social justice. Just to reiterate everything we've been talking about, this can be seen as teaching your students about making positive change in the world by connecting with them, discussing real world problems and multiple perspectives, creating classroom communities, and including authentic assessment. So you might be thinking this information is all well and good, but what is the point? What is the ultimate goal of social justice education? Well, the idea is that by incorporating social justice education in the classroom, the student will become aware of the issues in their community and in the world. And by then adding critical thinking to those issues, the students will start questioning why those issues exist in the first place. What is causing them, and what can be done to change them? This will hopefully lead them to take action and therefore creating social justice agents that can change the world.
Thanks, Rebecca. So as you can see, we're going from kind of larger ideas and now we're narrowing down to inside the classroom and what we can do as educators. So first, just some things to remember. We as teachers are facilitators of social justice. So not only are we creating a classroom that is built around social justice education, but again, we're trying to help our students develop these values that take them out into the world and relate to things outside of just our curriculum. So in terms of developing our own selves, and this may look like professional development, workshops, conferences, outside research, self-reflection, and then also we want to search for, examine, and question any potential biases we have. So this is an ongoing learning process, right? So we are constantly taking in information, evaluating what we're doing, and looking at our perspective. Why am I in this perspective? What is influencing me to be here? Who may be missing from these conversations? So constantly questioning and getting as much information as possible. In terms of inside the classroom, we found a really helpful source that spoke to communication specifically. So the first one is sharing as the norm. We want to set the standard for students to speak up and to share about themselves. So if we tell our own stories, that will encourage them to tell theirs. So establishing this idea of sharing as the norm allows students to feel safe voicing their identities while also receiving and welcoming the identities of others. Also, listening with intention. Are students actually hearing each other? Are they remembering what their peers are sharing? Past just a name. Are they recalling details? So, you can make it a goal for students to get to know their classmates and recall specific details about them. You can make a game out of it. You can even do a Kahoot. But, finding ways to make connections that way, it's just not going in and out. An issue we may encounter here is selective hearing and maybe some anxiety in terms of discussing perhaps more difficult topics. But we can take these moments as opportunities to teach our students that, especially trying to move this out into the community in the real world, it's okay to have these conversations and we want to have these conversations, but we can teach them how to pause, to listen, to reflect, and then to engage with what they're learning instead of just skipping straight to the engagement part without anything happening up here. And then lastly, we have respectful curiosity. We can also teach students how to ask questions, cultural differences in varied experiences. So some tangible kind of examples here, you could give them some example sentences or some frameworks. You could say, could you pronounce your name again for us? Or what was it like growing up in your blank town, country, etc. Even providing sentence stems that are like, I don't know much about that. Could you tell me more? And these are ways to help facilitate these productive conversations. Students can also interact non-verbally while others are speaking. This could be through hand signals, jotting down questions to ask after or symbols that are coming to mind. And even if you're in online format like you are right now, using the chat and reaction while in Zoom. So we want to make sure that we're stressing that bottom line again, action, action, action. So I'm sure you're wondering, Emily and Rebecca, all of this is great, but what are some ways I can do this in my classroom? We're here to help you. So I'm gonna throw some things out there for you right now, but Rebecca is about to offer even more ideas, and we'll do an activity together. So where you can think about your own ideas. But so we're questioning, how can students take social justice beyond the classroom and into the community? How can they get involved? So this could look like writing letters to elected officials, volunteering, attending school board or city council meetings, researching local advocacy groups, bringing in, like Rebecca said earlier, guest speakers, following organizations on social media. Social media is a big thing with our students right now. And even, having an assignment that asks them to interview someone in their community. There are a lot of different ways. We promise we'll talk about more, but just kind of get us thinking. We're going to throw that out there. And I also advise you to check out our handout. It has a lot of great stuff on there. And under our additional resources, we did provide a source for you that has 5 educators, and discusses the many different ways that they're taking this into action, both in their schools and communities. It's a really great read. It can help inspire some ideas for you, so I highly encourage you to do that. And then the last thing we have here, we just want to note that there is no finish line to be reached in terms of social justice education. And we're not saying that doing all of these things would tie a pretty bow on top and we're all set and good. This is an ongoing and evolving practice, and things will change. More conversations, more discussions, more questions. So just like as we said at the beginning of this slide, as we as teachers are always learning, our students are always learning, our communities are always learning. So we just wanted to stress that point. We have this really great visual that I love so much. So again, you can pause, you can come back, or you can listen. So this is kind of showing for you kind of a summary of everything we've been talking about. So if we start in the center, that yellow circle, it says educators interrogate their own knowledge, biases, and beliefs. So again, that word interrogate is really critical. So we are examining, looking, questioning why, potential bias. You may not even know what biases you have. Again, it's an ongoing process. So we can start there with ourselves at the center. Then we have what I call our pizza slices, or our pie slices. So these are things we're trying to promote in social justice education. So we have relationships and climate. We want these to be deep, collaborative, and equitable across differences. We are looking for behavior and discipline that's restorative, that's conscious, and that's non-discriminatory. Policies and procedures, we want these to foster diversity and justice. We want to grow in these things. We have images and celebrations. So we're reflecting the diversity of our students. We're not skimming over it. We have community, and then we also, again, are trying to branch out into the world around us and what's really happening. And then we have teaching and learning. We want this to be relevant, interesting, diverse, and that last one really resonates with us, empowering. So again, providing students with these tools. It's not just, from 8 to 5 every day at school. We're trying to facilitate it there and then moving it bigger. So now we're going to move it bigger. And in our box, we have, on the little edges here, kind of the bigger ideas surrounding all of this. So we have curriculum, standards, and testing. In Texas, this may look like TEKS or STAR. We have unions and boards. We have the educational industrial complex as itself. And then we have state and national policy. So we can see that it can go, social justice and social justice education goes from that small yellow circle, huge out to that big box. So there's a lot of things going on here. It's a lot to dissect. So again, I encourage you to come back and look at this source. I think it's really great. So I asked you earlier to think about what social justice education may look like. I warned you it was coming back, so here it is. So after learning all of this, I know it's a lot. I know we're taking in a lot right now. We want you to think, how has what this looked like changed for you? How, why, as you look back at your original writing.
So now that we've learned about social justice education, we really want to emphasize that implementing all of this should lead to transformative learning, which should lead to action. right? So this transformative learning through social justice education should lead to action. So now to get a little bit deeper into that, we're going to do an activity that unpacks action. And this was taken from Learning for Justice, which is a great resource that's on our PDF. I highly encourage checking it out. They have several lesson plans and more articles on how to implement this in your classroom. So let's get to the activity. We are going to think about the following quote and how it illustrates social action. So I encourage you to do this activity with me as I'm doing it, right? The quote is, "The world changes according to the way people see it. And if you can alter, even by a millimeter, the way people look at reality, then you can change it." James Baldwin. So now we're going to think about how does this quote support or change your understanding of action. So read that quote for yourself again and think about how it supports or changes your understanding of action. So for me, when I read this quote, I think, okay, if I change people's minds, people's perspectives, even just a little bit, then perhaps by changing that, they can see a certain issue that they hadn't seen before. And if they see it, then perhaps then they're going to want to change it. They're going to want to take action into changing it to better the world. So that's how I'm unpacking this quote. But please do it for yourself. Okay, so now we go on to the next step. We're going to go even deeper. Think about a time you have taken action or seen others take action to turn your beliefs or principles into reality. Consider what was positive and what was challenging about that action. So now I encourage you to take a piece of paper and draw out the graph that we have below. Taking action, divide the piece of paper. On one side, you're going to write the positive things that came out of it. And on the other side, you're going to write the challenging things. And I'll give an example for myself. So recently during our winter break, I went up to my son, who is 3, and I said, I think we should donate some of the toys that you are no longer using, because there's kids out there that don't have those toys, and perhaps they don't have the means to get those toys, and they really want to play just like you do. Okay. So then we went in his room and we sorted it out, and we did a huge pile to donate to a foster care system. So a positive thing about that is my son learned that sharing is caring, and that by donating the toys that he wasn't even using anymore, someone else is going to get joy out of that toy. A challenging part is that, of course, he was resistant in doing this activity. He was like, no, these are my toys. Why are we giving them away? And another challenging thing is actually he wanted to see the kids get the toys. Like, he wanted that gratification of seeing the kids. And of course, we couldn't see them actually getting the toys. But I think at the end of the day, he learned something, and that was the important part, that we took action to better someone else's life, hopefully. So, as you can tell from the activity, action can take many different shapes and help accomplish many different kinds of goals. If we think of action only in terms of major fights or struggles, it can feel inaccessible, right? That's like when we're trying to change the whole world all at once, it seems impossible. On the other hand, if we think of action only as the little things we do each day, we can lose track of the big picture. The following list includes macro and micro approaches to taking action. Think about the significance of each example and how it might make a difference or help achieve the goal. So the list is on the right-hand side, and it says, bring some cans to a canned food drive, clean up a park, explain curriculum to parents and colleagues, hosting an exchange student, making a change in your curriculum, marching for a cause, organizing a canned food drive, participating in a community mural, signing an online petition, speaking up at a meeting, speaking up when you hear someone making a racist joke, standing up to a bully, talking with a group of children about social justice, traveling to a different country or a different part of the country, voting on election day, writing a letter to a member of Congress. So as you can tell from this list, some of these are bigger things that you can do, and some of them are little things that you can do to help start making that change. And this is something you can share with your students as an example. So now I want you to take it into deeper thinking and reflection. What comes to mind about these different examples for you? What examples resonate with you and why? What do you think is challenging, empowering, or important about taking action? How might the answers to these questions be different for someone with an identity different than your own? I think that's really important to take these questions and really reflect back on, like, why, right? Why all these things? And that's the end of the activity. Again, I really encourage you to do this for yourself, but you can also take this activity and bring it into your classroom. This is just one example of something that you can do. So lastly, we have our teacher resources. You can also find this on our PDF, but we thought it was important to have it here because it directly relates to what we were talking about. So these are resources where you can get lesson plans. There's a social media link that you can see what other teachers are doing in their classroom. It's just great resources for you to have if you really want to start implementing this in your classroom, or even if you're not a teacher, just in your way of thinking, right? It can change your way of thinking, and these are great resources for that. All right, you have officially completed section 5. Congratulations. So now scroll down to section 6 and continue on. We will see you later.